Welcome to the Star Trek CCG Set Chat and Pack Crack video series. I'm Mike Semper, joined by Johannes Klarhauser, Dan Winterhalter, and Tom Target. In this video, we're diving into Blaze of Glory. Blaze of Glory came out in August of 1999, 130 cards, 40 commons, 40 uncommons, 50 rare, and 18 foils. The first time we've seen foils in a Star Trek pack. Dan, can you tell us more about Blaze of Glory and this new card distribution?
Absolutely. So Blaze of Glory introduces the diffraction foil. This is something Decipher ends up using across all of their different card games, and is the feature of one of the sets coming up in a few, the Reflection set. But Blaze of Glory introduces it for the first time with 18 unique foils at 3 different rarities: very rare, super rare, and ultra rare. The foils were inserted in place of the rare in 1 in 9 packs, making it a little bit harder to get your rare, your complete standard card set. They were on a 100 card sheet, and the ultra rares were on there twice each. The super rares were on there approximately 5 times each, and the very rares were on there between 8 and 10 times each. It varied by card, which was a little frustrating for some. For example, Board Cutting Beam Foil was on there 10 times, and a couple of the other ones were only on there 8. We had 8 very rares, 6 super rares, and 4 ultra rares, including Locutus's Board Cube, Jadzia Dax, Riker Will, a Bajoran Will Riker persona, and Garrick, Elam Garrick.
So from a player perspective, Johannes, what's going on with Blaze of Glory?
Well, the biggest thing in Blaze of Glory was, first of all, that it put more emphasis on the combat and battle aspects. So it introduced the tactic card as a new card type that is used exclusively when things get damaged. That means if ships battle, or if your ship is damaged by, for example, a dilemma that has a damage effect. And what it does is it gives additional modifications to your ship's weapons and shields. They now use the expressions attack and defense totals. So you can actually make your ship stronger than the printed weapons you have. And this adds a hidden component because you don't know what the defender plays, for example, whether they use something that boosts their attack or whether they play a tactic that boosts their shields enough that they can withstand a hit. And that is, it makes it a bit more interesting. And also it gives more tools for personal battle. There are now a couple of hand weapons that you can report to where a personal battle is taking place from hand. So you don't have to report it for duty, but you can report them right when combat starts as kind of hidden bonus, like the Dictag for the Klingons or the Starfleet Type 1 phaser for Federation guys. So it puts more emphasis on that. The personal battle rules had actually been overhauled already in First Contact, because we mentioned this in our preliminary discussion. So that was already in 97 when it started to turn into a one-on-one personal combat. You have more casualties and so on. What is interesting about this set is that it didn't include a new affiliation. In the last 3 sets we discussed, we had the Dominion, we had Cardassians and Bajorans, we had the Borg. This time we only get tools for the existing affiliations. And this is something that won't happen again until Holodeck Adventures. So we now get more stuff for the guys we already have. And we also get stuff that deals with abusive tactics that were used in the game. For example, we get a couple of ref cards. One of the most well-known ones is the Big Picture that forces you to score 40 additional points if you haven't actually completed a space and a planet. So if you played only space missions, so your Roland's planet missions, planet dilemmas were useless, you now actually have to score more points. And this is a very popular rule that in virtual format in OTF, this has actually been turned into a standard rule. So you don't actually have to play that card anymore. There has also been scanner interference, which was used to discourage the playing of scan and full planet scan to very useful interrupts that were probably a bit too good. And also the Wake of the Borg to attack patrol neutral zone decks, where you can simply destroy everything at a neutral zone location. So lots of cards where they realized this is probably not the direction we want the game to go, or this is not what players should be encouraged to do. And some of those cards were actually quite heavy-handed. Klingons and Romulans get lots of tools, lots of very good personnel, and probably my favorite subset here is the Klingon Blood Oath gang, consisting of Jetsia and the 3 old Klingon guys, and they work really well together, and they are also, I think most of them also exist in foil, not the Blood Oath, but the personal, and that's also something that I very much like to see in the pack.
Johannes, you mentioned the tactics. If you're playing tactics, like, do you know, like, how does that work? Do you know your opponent has tactics and use, or like a separate deck, or is it just kind of like this instant, like, oh, surprise?
You're correct that you do know that they are running tactics, because tactics are now stocked in a Battle Bridge side deck. So you have to invest a seed card, the Battle Bridge door, and that is visible to all players. So it costs you a seed slot, and then you can use those tactics, but you don't actually know which tactic your opponent is going to use. When a ship battle starts, you draw 2 cards and you choose one of them, and your opponent does likewise, and then you flip them at the same time. And when you are using a Battle Bridge door and you run dilemmas that damage your opponent's ship, then standard rotation damage, where your ship is turned sideways and is reduced to 5, it now actually works with those tactic cards as well. Usually damage will result in 2 tactic cards, and they also have then additional bad effects. For example, they can kill a random personnel, or they can kill a personnel with science or exobiology or something like that. So this was also something that you could use to complement your dilemmas by running the correct tactics, so they target specific skills when your opponent runs in those dilemmas.
How common is it to see Battle Bridge door in the side deck, like in OTF tournaments? Now, is this a card a lot of folks bring? Is this one you always need to bring just in case your opponent is going to do it? Like, how does it play out that way?
That's a very good question, and I can't really answer that because there are some people who say you should always run one because it just gives your ships so much more defense. Others say that's a valuable seed slot that I don't really need. It's very situational. I don't want to battle myself, so I use that seed slot for an additional dilemma. Last tournament I went to, in none of my 3 games, either player had a Battle Bridge door. I have also played in tournaments where I saw a Battle Bridge in every game I played. So it's probably always a question with what draw deck, what strategy do you play? Do you need something that complements that, or do you just play pure speed and every seed slot can be used for something more valuable?
And incidents, I think, were introduced in this set as well. Can you explain a little bit about that new card type?
Yeah, it's a new card type. The main thing is that it's like an event that stays on table, but it is not an event. So there are 2 big advantages. One, the template was changed. You get rid of the flavor text, so you can use all the lower portion of the card for game text, resulting in a bit more complex cards that allow more interesting stuff to do. And also, it cannot simply be countered by the counter cards that have been in the game since the very first set, where you just get rid of an event by playing a counter interrupt, because they specifically target events, and since an incident is not an event, they cannot be targeted. So they don't actually have to print things like immune to Kevin Uxbridge and all that stuff.
All right, what's going on with Blaze of Glory from a collector perspective?
I think there's some interesting things here. I think when it comes to the factions especially, we've been on a bit of a journey for a while with this game. We start in Premiere with a serious imbalance between the Federation and the Klingons and the Romulans, with the Federation having all these absolute skill monsters and the Klingons and Romulans being woefully underprepared relative to skills and attributes. And we've mentioned along our journey here some attempts to correct this. So, for example, we see the Klingons getting a bit of a buff in the introductory 2-player game with the introduction of Moog and Gerard. And we've mentioned others like Sirol, an uncommon Romulan, trying to balance it out. But even so, those cards also came in tandem with other good Federation personnel, such as the introductory 2-player Commander Data, Commander Troy, and Admiral Picard, and other good Federation rares in those earlier sets too. And I think the poor Klingon and Romulan players were looking at that because when DS9 comes out and Dominion, now you have 3 new factions that are also better than you as well. So the skills and attribute balance for your Bajoran, Cardassians, and Dominion players were far better than your Klingons and Romulans. There's a little bit of love for the Romulans in DS9, but they're not main characters. They're sort of one episode, fairly minor characters who are brought in. So they're not bad, but they're not great. You don't want to be playing with these sort of arbitrary characters. And a lot of the ones you loved were underprepared in the earlier sets. Now, Dominion aids the Romulans a little bit again. We see the introduction of characters like Colonel Lovok, and these are getting into some good cards. But I think Blaze of Glory was the the deliberate attempt to bring those 2 factions back up to pace. Because when it comes to this collection, the personnel distribution has 12 Klingons and 12 Romulan cards, which span some excellent rares, like the Klingon cards that we've talked about so far, but also introduces more of those sort of common Klingon and Romulan cards that you can have multiple copies of in a deck, which also have a good number of skill balances. Even if they were just some Romulan guy standing in a corridor, he's a really good Romulan guy standing in a corridor when it comes to terms of gameplay. And the other thing in the collector's side of things I really loved about this set was the introduction of Captain Kavok from the 1994 VCR video board game, which I absolutely loved as a kid. If you have not experienced Beige, I thoroughly recommend that you find the video that is on YouTube and find an old copy of that set. So we'd seen the introduction of new, like with First Contact, and we'd seen DS9, we'd seen new Star Trek IPs, but to have something quite abstract relative to that included as a fairly normal card, I absolutely adore that. And for those of you that haven't played that video game, there is a masterclass in acting from Robert O'Reilly at the end of the video that you must witness. So I was really happy to see Captain Kavok with the property logo interactive VCR board game rather than just DS9 or TNG. So I really loved seeing those things in this set.
Another comment is this is where they introduced the first, pack accessible Miles O'Brien card. He's only been available in Fajo up until this point, so there was an incompletion in your DS9 main crew until now.
Yes, because the Fajo was his transporter Chief O'Brien, whereas here we see the introduction of Chief Miles O'Brien with the DS9 probably logo as opposed to the TNG logo.
Right. As well as his brainwashed counterpart for a Romulan.
Yep, another fairly good Romulan card. I think this is the also slightly sad thing about the rebalancing is that much of the rebalancing is done with personas of Federation characters. So, if I'm playing a Klingon or Romulan deck, I'd want to be playing Klingon and Romulan cards, sort of imagining I was, as a kid, especially imagining I was playing with those factions. Whereas a lot of the rebalancing in this set is done with your Worf, son of Moog, or Quark, son of Keldar, or the Forge impersonator, or a Miles O'Brien impersonator. So they're very good cards, but they're not inherently cards from those factions. So I understand why they had to. They kind of painted himself into a corner by underskilling the main characters from those factions in the earlier set. So it's a good attempt to rebalance, but a little bit of a sort of sadness in the terms of the lore component of it.
Might have been fun to just give those Romulans a new persona themselves.
Yep, you could have a second sealer, or you could have any number of other things. That would have been a nice way to do it. I'd get the appeal of having different versions of known characters, because both the Jadzia Dax in the Federation version is good, and the Jadzia Dax in the Klingon version is good here too. But it would have been nice to see more of the Klingon characters I loved brought up to a comparable skill level.
Absolutely.
Anything else regarding the set before we talk about cards that we want to open?
I've always loved this set. It's fun to open. It's always been very irritatingly rare and hard to get your hands on. Even when other things have dropped in price, this one always consistently kept value, particularly for sealed product because of people fishing for the foils. And I think fishing for these interesting Romulan and Klingon personnel as well. So
I think we're seeing a reduction.
I have not opened nearly as much of it as I wish I had.
I think we've seen a reduction in production run as these sets becomes more valuable, but this one specifically, future sets can still be very cheap, even though the production run was lower than in the earlier days. But I think Dan's right. I think in this set you're still seeing a very large player base. You're seeing a rebalancing of factions, and you're seeing the introduction of foil hunting in the set as well. So this one is uniquely expensive for this period of the Decipher production run.
Does anybody have an inclination as to why Decipher decided to introduce foils at this time?
I don't know at the time. Probably just Decipher did a bunch of wonderful things in the art of great games. They really genuinely looked at how to make things beautiful and interesting, and why they chose this time to do foils. For all I know, it could be they found someone who could make cards like this and were like, oh, we want to do that too. But I don't actually know.
Is this something that Magic did at the time?
Okay.
Now, I don't know. I'm not familiar with other games. It's just me wondering whether they have seen it in other companies. I don't know.
That's a good point. I don't know how early Magic started doing foiling. That's I think a good hypothesis. They saw the folks doing it like Magic.
And I think we are witnessing the evolution of an industry. So we talked in earlier sets about how many people assumed that the game would be balanced by people not having complete sets. So rarity being a measure, whereas that didn't turn out to be the case for those who really get into the game. And I think what the introduction of foils is doing here, and in general, in many ways, is providing an avenue for those sort of heavy buyers of the game to seek out and hunt down more interesting things for their collection. So there's a little bit of greed in there, but at least it's done in a sort of semi-interesting way, with a new product to experience.
And as a collector and player, I think that my last game until just recently was while Blaze of Glory had come out. I did appreciate that the foils were not unique cards. They were reprints of rares in that set. So if I got a foil Jadzia Dex, I could play her in my Klingon deck, or I could play the rare. I didn't have to struggle desperately to get the ultra rare in this case for play purposes.
So speaking of play purposes, Johannes, what do we want to open in this set?
There are so many interesting cards. I looked through my collection the other day and I noticed that the card I have the most copies of, probably because I specifically ordered them, was actually the card called Captured. So it's a card that you can seed, it's a hidden agenda, and you can flip it. And if you have the correct requirements, meaning more security or more hand weapons, you can then capture an opponent's guy. And you can seed multiple copies and basically walk in at some point and then capture a lot of very important guys to your opponent's strategy, hopefully ones that are key to them actually completing a mission. So that's one strategy that I've played, that I've built a deck around. Also, the outgunned interrupt can be quite powerful. It also works with capturing, and we see a lot of that in Blaze of Glory. Outgunned is something that you basically do more or less instead of ship battle. You have to have a lot of weapons, and then if your weapons are high enough, you don't actually destroy the ship, but rather you take it over and you take all the people aboard captive, which can be better than just killing them, because if you kill them, they can be regenerated from the discard pile. But if you capture them, your opponent has a much harder time of getting access to their personal.
And on the collector side of what you want to open, first of all, if we talk about value of cards, in the early days of the game, your Enterprise and your Picard would be the ones you'd want to see the most, but their value wasn't radically huge compared to the average rare in that kind of set. The introduction of the ultra rare Future Enterprise changes things, and that for a while that was definitely the most valuable card that you could hope to acquire. And that was true even through First Contact. But when you come into the DS9 era, now you have the DS9 Terok Nor card, which is coming in at 10 times to 20 times the value of an average rare in that set. And what we're seeing here is we have these 4 ultra rare foils, which all have values equal to or higher than that DS9 card now. So this set does contain 4 of the most, at this point in the game, expensive cards that would exist for you to acquire. So those ultra rare foils will be what you want to see. However, when it comes to the other foils, especially with the very rares, there are many average rares in this set which are far more valuable than the very rare foils. So of course you want to see the ultra rare foils. super rare fours are good too, but the very rares, I'd rather see one of the more valuable standard rares in the set. And the ones that stand out for sure, as you mentioned already, Miles O'Brien, he's not an ultra rare, but I sort of consider him the sort of stand-in ultra rare of the regular rare cards in this set, because you definitely wanted him in your DS9 set collection. Most of the rares in the set have some value, especially relative to other sets, but ones that stand out for me, Jadzia Dax is one of the definitely more valuable rares in this set. Worf, son of Mo, Quark, son of Keldar, and any of those other high-value Klingons would be welcome too. Kavok, for example, isn't very valuable, but he's definitely one I'd like to see. When it comes to uncommons, this set is one of the hardest to complete in terms of getting, especially mint condition uncommon cards. It's very difficult to find complete sets of it quite often, and individual uncommons can often sell for twice the value of white border premier rares. So there's actually quite a good set of value in the uncommons, and even the common cards, especially with the tactics, there are quite a few. So on the uncommon side of things, you'd love to see a Crimson Force Field tactic. That's the most valuable of the uncommons. Attack Ship Alpha is a very high statted Dominion ship that you can have multiple copies of. Defense System Upgrade, which upgrades the weapons and shields of your Nor class stations, is always in demand because it is one of those cards that has the cumulative effect. You can just keep stacking them on top of each other. And of course, all it takes is one person wanting to build a heavily upgraded Nor class station to create a massively outsized demand for that card. And also in the uncommons, Lupiza and Pharrell, the Bajoran team from several episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, are above average in value. On the common side, Battle Bridge Door has some value because of the utility we've seen so far. And of the tactics, most of them are common, but Full Phaser Spread is definitely the common tactic that has the highest value of those common tactics that I've seen so far. So that's what we'd like to be opening.
All right, well, here we are. Let's take a peek here. At our Blaze of Glory pack, 9 cards, 6 is the rare. Here we go.
If your experience is anything like mine, it will be the Goraxus as the foil card staring in your face. That one has been haunting me.
Well, still a beautiful card.
It is, yeah.
Foil cards 1 in 9 packs. So, all right, let's see what we get. Tactic. Hey, there's the Battle Bridge Door.
Fantastic.
We can play tactics now.
That's right off of. I think that one's right off of the first episode of Next Generation too, right off of Farpoint.
Yep, it's one of the only times you see it. And there's very few appearances.
And Johannes, you said you need this card to play tactics. Is that right?
Yes, because they form their own side deck, and the side deck is opened in doorway phase by playing this one, or seeding it rather.
And it's common, right, Tom?
Correct.
Victory is life. That one is good. It shows up a bunch. It's a nice way to get some points out of your expendable cards.
Another tactic.
Yeah, these each of the major factions gets a sort of faction-specific type tactic, but there's a bonus if this is a bonus for a Klingon ship. There's the Romulan plasma torpedoes, and the Federation gets phasers and photon torpedoes and things like that. So it doesn't mean you can't use all these different things in different ways, but there's definite, hey, each faction has its own tactic kind of approach.
And the -2 range here is probably one of the more desirable penalties to the ship, because usually if you hit them with 2, that means the range is reduced by 4 already, and that is often enough to just make sure they are stuck and can't get past a certain mission.
The tactic cards are all beautiful too. I've always loved the art on them. They pull great screenshots from beautiful ships.
I think this is our 5th. I think the next one's the rare, but I may be mistaken.
Nope, that one's not.
Okay, let's be the next one.
This is not an uncommon amount of tactics as well, given that if you have a stack of cards from this set, about half of your common set, half to a third are tactics. So you do get a lot of them.
Sword of Kahless, probably rare.
Yes, definitely.
Rare number 1 in the set. It's the first. It's the first card in the list. It's fun. It's not one of the highest value, but there is often demand for it. People do want to have this card.
Looks as though it works well with Kalis. Okay. Klingon.
So here's an example with the uncommon. This is just an uncommon Klingon, but they've got the two types. So we have both officer and science, I believe, there, and then 2 additional skills. So it's a fairly reasonable card. It's got the command icon, high in strength. You're talking about, this is just a nice card to have, comparable to some of the Federation ones you'd see in the Premier set. But finally, you're getting Klingons and Romulans with this sort of reasonable balance of skills and attributes.
Very, very impressive card for someone who's, I believe, only had one line on the show, which was "We won," and then he died. Or victory.
Yeah.
This one can be very evil. So here we have another hidden agenda, the sniper here, and it also probes, meaning when the effect happens, you reveal the top card of your deck, and then you look at the revealed card, and if any of the icons matches one that is in the results list here, then you do that. And what's interesting here is that you can also see this in multiples, and at the start of each battle you initiate, if you have a hand weapon present, Phasal Disruptor, target one personal. So meaning if you have multiples of these seeded, you can target several people, and then you only need to have the correct probe on the one card. And then, for example, if you look at the first line, if you reveal the correct probe card, then all those targets are mortally wounded. So if you invest a couple of seed slots in multiple snipers, then you can potentially eliminate a lot of people by personal battle, or also if you manage to hit them with the sleeper trap dilemma that downloads Cardassians with a hand weapon. So there are a lot of things that you can do with cards like these.
It's also a good example of what Johannes said earlier about, because you don't have a lore box, there's more text available to you. But I think it also contributes to what people call the complexity creep of the game, whereas especially around this set, we're moving away from just the simple personnel and mission solving. Combat's becoming a bigger thing. It would take you a while to read this card, think about synergies, see how it works. So it's one of the reasons that I tend to stick with just the earlier sets and playing casually with new players, because it does tend to be quite complex when you get into these kind of territories.
And this is also something that I've noticed in games that people that aren't familiar with all the cards and who is often say it when their opponent uses things like that: I'll just let you do your stuff and trust that you do everything correctly, and I worry about my own cards, because it's at some point it's just getting very, very complex, as you said.
It's amazing how many times I lose when that happens. Oh, you got the attack ship Alpha. So look at this. Look at the stats on this. I mean, I think they sort of over-egg the pudding when it comes to, especially the Dominion ships. So I know these little Locust ships are, they're supposed to be powerful in swarm numbers, so it makes sense to have the icon that allows you to have multiple copies of it. But you're talking about one crew staffing icon for a ship with comparable weapons and shields to the Enterprise in the Premier set. So we're definitely seeing a sort of power creep when it comes to ships, and the Dominion had a lot of very powerful, very small ships. I know they sort of took a toll on the range. It didn't have the sort of zipping about factor that you might want, but it's an in-demand card because you can have multiple copies of it, and it is powerful.
And and being an alpha, it's not required to limit it to the Gamma Quadrant.
Correct.
And we did see one of these ships, Kamikaze, a Galaxy class early on. That was how they established the Dominion as a real threat.
Yeah, I think what would have been good for this ship is, because you would have a card to make that happen. I think there is a card that does that. But what I think would have been good for the Dominion ships like this would be maybe the more of them you have, the more like a Rogue Borg mercenary type mechanic would have worked well for these, rather than just having this incredibly powerful tiny ship.
Sure,
because in a lot of the battles you see so many of these destroyed. It's like, well, okay, it's not like one per galaxy in the sort of average ratio. So I think that there would have been a better way to make these ships more powerful by using a swarm type mechanic.
They did a little bit to that effect. In this set, you have one tactic that is called Attack Wing, and that actually gives you an attack bonus of +1 for each of your ships firing. So it's they're getting better the more of them you play, so get the additional bonuses. But I agree what you said would have been a very nice, flavorful strategy to implement.
Give it a 666 or something like that, and then add one for each other Dominion attack class or whatever.
Especially because we see episodes where, like, a bird of prey will take down 3 or 4 of these, and of course you're never going to get that exact synergy between the lore and the cards, and of course it's situational. But I do think they over-egged the Dominion ships like that, because if you look at the Dominion battleships that you get in future sets, they're not that much more powerful than this one tiny Locust ship, in that kind of context. So I think they did overdo it. It's still a great card to get.
That plutonium armor, though, is really hard. The armor of plot.
Yep.
Well, there's our pack. What do you think overall?
I love the set. I think it was slightly underwhelming rare, but still a good one.
It's definitely in demand. It's one of those classic things. I loved it. I love the episode that it comes from, and I think overall it's just such a fun set, especially for the Klingons, most of all, for Romulans as well. But I really enjoyed the fact that the game can be balanced so much better by using rares and uncommons and commons from this set.
Agreed.
It was kind of nice to open up some of the cards we talked about, although sort of Kayla's artifact was kind of an interesting kind of oddball out there. Oh, what is this? And this might be the only pack where we barely got any personnel and ships. I mean, the last 2 polls were a personnel and a ship, and I think I've disclosed that, for me, opening up personnel and ships is really fun. But the 3 tactics, it's interesting that there's so much new going on. Be interested to hear more about both the power creep and the complexity, as we kind of get toward the second half of these of the Cypher sets. Rules of Acquisition is next, and talk to you then.
Good.
Tom, you had an extra point?
Let's not pretend that we weren't all waiting for that ultra rare foil as well, right? So when there's something that you could get, like it's a great rare to pull, but we're not comparing it to the average rare. We're comparing it to a hierarchy of foil cards. So don't be disappointed. You had the experience that 8 out of 9 pack openings would have. That's it.
Well, we have more too. Then we'll keep talking about the opening up these really, really chase cards and all these sets and what those cards are. Certainly, we have a few sets coming up where we have a huge chance again to get really, really powerful and importantly collectible cards. So let's hope as we move along.